Okay, my name is Raphael. I'm presenting for international business on how multinational corporations and developing economies cause corruption. So to start off, we're going to go over the framework of the discussion. First, we're going to go over how corruption is typically measured. Then we'll go over a specific case of a multinational corporation that engaged in a decade-long corruption scandal. In this case, it'll be Walmart. And finally, we'll go over how China, a specific country, engages in corruption, and discussing that on a broader level. So, challenge in corruption in general, it's how corruption is measured. Um, the most trusted source and organization is Transparency International. They're a trusted source at the same level that the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund is trusted in economic data. They're trusted in gathering a metric that determines how corrupt or how transparent a country is. So the way they do it is they gather survey data. The survey data is collected from um, uh, government officials, business people, and also members of NGOs that participate in those specific countries. But the limit, the limiting factor in the data that they collect is that it is survey data, so it is largely based on the perception of those individuals that respond to the surveys. And a limiting factor of this is that many of the individuals participating in the survey are actually from advanced Western nations, so they might have a different perception or a different culture of how um, they perceive acts of corruption, and so it is limiting in that sense. But what they'll do is they'll take several of these metrics and they'll actually plug it into a statistical model so that they can compare it with several sources and ultimately create an index that ranks the countries and how corrupt they are. So it is weighed and they do account for these limiting factors, but it is still important to recognize that it is perception data at the end of the day. Um, so with that in mind, we know that it is difficult to measure corruption, so it's important to discuss corruption in specific cases and how this happened. So, specifically, what happened with Walmart was that executives from their international subsidiaries were bribing government officials um, in Mexico. The corruption scandal actually happened in several countries: China, Mexico, Brazil, and India. But in Mexico specifically, they were bribing the officials so that they would get building permits approved and achieve more growth for the company in Mexico. Um, these practices eventually became a norm for Walmart, and the headquarters in Arkansas never caught on until 2005 when one of the Walmart executives came to light with it. Then Walmart kept it to themselves for about 7 years until 2012, when the New York Times reported that there had been corrupt acts going on Walmart's behalf, and this was New York Times became aware of this because the executives from Walmart brought it to light. When the New York Times report came out, then Walmart ultimately confessed to the allegations, and they were forced to pay $282 million in fines to the SEC and the United States Department of Justice. um, so, as mentioned before, one of the countries that Walmart engaged in corruption with or in was in China. Um, in China, corruption is still very common. The way that it occurs with multinational corporations, though, is that they engage in rent-seeking behavior. Rent-seeking behavior is essentially a common example of explaining it is an aristocrat who owns land with a river flowing through it, and ships flow through the river to transport goods. So, upon realizing this, the aristocrat places a chain and hires a collector to charge the ships as they're passing by. So, this does not create any economic growth. It only enriches the aristocrat and it doesn't benefit anyone else. So, that's how multinational corporations do their corruption in China. This happens widely in the housing market because they are artificially increasing the housing prices because there is a lot of housing, but it's still quite expensive, and so they are charging more than what they should and driving up the cost, which ultimately affects its citizens. It's a particular issue in the real estate industry in China. And for Chinese provinces in particular, they're vulnerable to several factors that are common for corruption to take place, which is large local government intervenes a lot. There's slow GDP per capita, and there's a lack of integration into the local economy from local businesses. If these things were not happening, then it'd be more difficult for corruption to be happening. It sort of creates this isolating effect for corrupt acts to take place. And finally, corruption in China is particularly challenging because the corrupt acts happening are more complex, and due to the nature of its government and its secretive practices, it is more difficult to uncover. China typically will deny any allegations of corruption and will try to crack down internally on these things if they can, and if it is in their best interest. So that's what makes it challenging. And with that, that is the rest of my presentation. Thank you.